Welcome to Idaho Fish and Game's Hook and Bulletin podcast, your weekly news roundup of hunting, fishing, trapping, and conservation stories from around the Gem State. Hosted by Fish and Game's Public Information Specialist, Connor J. Lease.
And welcome back, everyone, to Idaho Fish and Game's Hook and Bulletin podcast. It's been kind of a slower week, I guess, for hunting, fishing, trapping, and conservation stories here in Idaho. This week on the Hook and Bulletin, we'll be talking about public comment opportunities for rule changes related to fishing, a reminder to apply for big game controlled hunts by June 5th, and playing tag you're it with smallmouth bass. But first, some poaching news coming out of the southwest region. Idaho Fish and Game conservation officers in the southwest region are looking for information about a mule deer doe that was shot near Banks and left to waste sometime between May 5th and May 8th. Conservation officers found the doe in the Zimmer Creek area of Unit 33, just northeast of Banks. What made this incident particularly egregious is the fact that this doe was still pregnant with two fawns that were very close to being born, said Conservation Officer Corey Taylor. Anyone with information that may be helpful in this case is encouraged to contact Officer Taylor at 208-781-1391. Alternatively, folks can call the Citizens Against Poaching hotline at 1-800-632-5999 or report online at idfg.idaho.gov/poacher. Callers can remain anonymous and could be eligible for a reward for providing information that leads to a citation. All right, moving on to this next one. If you want to provide comments on Fish and Game's proposed fishing rules changes, now is your chance. After sifting through dozens of suggestions from anglers, Idaho Fish and Game biologists, with the approval from the Fish and Game Commission, are presenting the proposed fishing seasons and rules changes for the 2025 through 2027 fishing seasons. Anglers, that means you. The window to provide comments is now open through June 10th, which can be done on the public comment webpage. After reviewing feedback and considering agency goals, season recommendations will be presented to the Commission for consideration at the July 23rd and 24th meeting in Pocatello. Only one statewide change is being considered, which is lowering the bag limit for whitefish from 25 to 10, unless otherwise noted in the regs. There are proposed changes for each region except the salmon region. Anglers are encouraged to comment on these proposals to help Fish and Game staff and the Commission gauge their preferences. That's all I got on that. If you're interested and want to see all the proposals for yourself, head on over to idfg.idaho.gov/fish/seasons or just hit the link in the description. All right, time to take a look at another fish story. Back in 2006, Idaho Fish and Game began its Tag You're It program to collect information from tagged fish across the state. When an angler reports a tagged fish, that vital information gets used to estimate angler harvest, meaning the proportion of fish in a population harvested each year by anglers. Here at Fish and Game, we owe anglers all over the state an immense gratitude for helping us better understand our bass fisheries and how current fishing regulations are working. When reporting tags, anglers are asked whether they harvested or released the fish, thus allowing estimates of catch and release also to be made. A recent summary of bass tagging data provides an interesting perspective on Idaho's fisheries, so here's what came up. Smallmouth bass are mainly found in lakes and reservoirs, other than a few river populations. In lakes and reservoirs, annual rates of harvest for smallmouth bass have averaged 18% over the last 20 years, compared to an average of 29% for annual catch and release rates. In other words, about half of the smallmouth bass in a lake or reservoir fishery are being caught by anglers each year, and most of those are caught and then released. Largemouth bass primarily reside in two very different Idaho water types, one being lakes and reservoirs, and the other being community fishing ponds. In lakes and reservoirs, annual rates of harvest have averaged 15% for largemouth bass, compared to a whopping 52% average annual catch and release rate. This means that in Idaho lakes and reservoirs, about 2/3 of the largemouth bass are being caught annually, but the vast majority of those are being released. In community ponds, largemouth bass annual harvest was higher, averaging 24%, while catch and release averaged 49%. So basically 75% of all the fish were being caught each year. But at some ponds, our biologists estimated that total catch, or harvest plus catch and release, was over 100%, meaning that just about every fish was being caught once, or even sometimes twice, each year. This type of information might seem like a bunch of number soup, but in fact it actually provides Idaho fisheries managers with a better understanding of how harvest might be influencing bass population abundance and size structure. This kind of information would not be possible without anglers reporting tagged fish that they catch. So keep up the good work. With that, it's time for the Rapid Fire Bulletin. Big game hunters, don't worry, we didn't forget about you. Don't forget, controlled hunt applications are currently open for deer, elk, pronghorn, swan, fall black bear, and fall turkey. The window to apply slams shut on June 5th, so don't dilly-dally. Hunters can also apply for the first Super Hunt drawing through May 31st. All applicants will receive an email with their draw results by early July if there's a valid email in their license account. Hey, in case you missed last week's commission meeting in Coeur d'Alene, it is now available, in full HD I might add, now over on our YouTube channel. Topics covered include the 2025 through 2027 fisheries seasons and rules for release for public comment, and the fiscal year 25 shooting range grant funding recommendations. Every agenda item is time-stamped down in the video's description, so if you wanted to flip back to a specific section that interests you, just scroll down and jump right to where you want to go. The video link and its press release can be found in this episode's description. And speaking of the Fish and Game Commission meeting, during its May 16th meeting, the Fish and Game Commission made the decision to change the 2024 spring Chinook salmon seasons in the Clearwater River Basin. Now that about 90% of Idaho's spring return have passed over Bonneville Dam, fish and game biologists have a pretty good idea of how many fish will ultimately return to the Clearwater River Basin. Our staff are now projecting that around 14,000 adult fish will return to the Clearwater River and provide a harvest share of around 4,500 fish. Based on that 4,500 adult harvest share, Fish and Game staff recommended to the Commission to increase the number of days one could fish from 4 days a week to 7 days a week. Now note, this would not apply to the North Fork Clearwater River, which would remain at 4 days a week. Additionally, Fish and Game staff recommended increasing the daily limit in the South Fork Clearwater River from 1 adult to 2 adults. The Commission adopted the staff's recommendation based on this information, and thus the changes took effect immediately. All other seasons and rules for Idaho's spring Chinook salmon fisheries will remain the same. For more information, check out Joe DuPont's article on our website, link in the description. Okay, that's it for this week's stories. It's time for our question of the week. This question comes to us from a hunter who asked that we don't use her name. While on a cow elk hunt last fall, I could have harvested a cow who had a calf with her, but since they were by themselves and not with a herd, I did not shoot the cow as I thought the calf would not survive the winter without its mother. What would have been the calf's chance of survival to spring without its mother had I harvested the cow? All right, so like most of these questions here on the podcast, I reached out to a few of our experts for a solid answer. The chances are pretty high of a calf surviving for several reasons. First, the cow is probably not lactating, so the calf is no longer directly reliant on its mother for nutrition. The mother has already taught the calf behavior that would help it survive, and although they appeared to be alone, there were likely other elk in the general area. Elk are pretty good at locating each other, so there's a strong chance the calf would have rejoined a herd. However, you clearly erred on the side of caution, and that's rarely a bad choice. To go deeper, elk calf survival depends on a number of factors, including disease, predators, nutrition, maternal care, weather, and accidents. Generally, highest mortality in elk calves occurs during the first few months of life, where predators can take a high percentage of calves. During the midsummer through fall period, elk calves generally have higher survival rates. Now, survival during winter varies considerably, depending on how harsh winter conditions are and what predators exist in the area. Elk calves are generally reliant on milk for the first month, but will continue to suckle for several months if allowed by the mother. Within a couple of weeks of birth, elk calves begin to eat natural vegetation, and by a couple of months old, they are capable of surviving without milk. A significant factor when considering whether orphaning of elk calves results in higher mortality is whether the calf joins other elk. Generally, by July, elk cows and calves begin to form small little groups. Orphaned elk calves that remain in an elk group or find another group are expected to have higher survival rates. So that's a great question. Thank you so much for sending it in. And that's all the news we have for this week. Thanks for putting an ear to Idaho Fish and Game's Hook and Bulletin. If there's something on your mind, or if you got a question related to fish and game matters, feel free to drop us a line at podcast@idfg.idaho.gov. Again, that's podcast@idfg.idaho.gov. Thank you for listening, folks. We'll catch you next week.